Like, what has been like your highest commission check?
Me personally? Yeah, I don't know. I just don't know. I could say, well, let me speak to deal size, I guess,
Yeah.
for the company. So we've done deals where we're getting organizations like 2 mil, you know. So that's like to your pocket. So if you think about your revenue for a year,
Yeah.
like what else could you ask for in terms of the amount of work that you're doing?
All right, welcome back to another episode of Moving the Mountain, a creative leadership podcast. Today's guest is Manny Cumplido of Hundredfold Consulting and Modal.
Modal.
It's his new company, and we're going to be getting into that in just a second. The last time that you were here, you were doing the Rent Sons, which is that startup. A really interesting concept.
Well, last time I was here, I had already stepped out of that. I had already been out of that for a while.
But we had talked about that
we
kind
were
of.
talking
Yeah,
about
we were
it.
kind of talking about how you do your role there and how you guys were doing that.
Yeah.
And now you're in this Hundredfold consultancy, which we actually use you guys for
Move Mountains.
the ERC.
Yeah.
Move Mountains use you guys for the ERC credit, which was super helpful. We were able to get a large refund, or I don't know if they're calling it a refund, but you know, back
It's a refundable credit
relatively quickly, which was nice because
you did. You were lucky because you did it last year, and you got it real quick. And for IRS time, we were shocked what was going on at the end of last year. It was just like 3 months.
Yeah.
For once.
Right. And I mean, I just read something too recently, because this is obviously not something that you learn in the school system, but income tax was deemed as unconstitutional up until like the late 1800s, where they tried to impose a small income tax, and it was shot down as being unconstitutional. And then they ratified, I think it's like the 16th Amendment, and that allowed them to collect tax, which was supposed to be temporary. And it's supposed to be a 1% tax, income tax. And then from there, it's just gone up and up and up and up.
Sure.
And gotten out of control to where like 40%. So it's very kind of wild. And people talk like, especially, Christians, and I want to know your perspective on this because you went to seminary school, right?
Yeah.
So I was looking up because
we don't have any classes on taxes, but we'll see how this goes.
Well, there's a verse about render to Caesar what's Caesar's, and then how the Roman government was like really overtaxing its people.
Yeah.
And they had a heavy tax burden. But I looked into that, and I guess it was between 1% and 5%.
That was what the tax was.
That's what they deemed a heavy burden.
Sure.
Like that.
I don't know.
Overtaxed.
I don't know if I can't speak to the accuracy of that piece, but I can say that whole passage about render to Caesar what is Caesar, and render to God what is God's. So for people who don't know the story, is Jesus is being challenged by religious leaders, by Jewish religious leaders, who are trying to trick him basically to have him say something that will either displease the crowd, incriminate him either with the crowds or with the Romans. It's also good to remember that the Roman Empire had subjugated the Jewish people, and so they were, these taxes were resented. Any form of tax was resented, and so that's the context. They're trying to get him to either say something against the Romans or say something that would upset, the large base of his followers, who were mostly Jewish people. Under the boot of the Roman Empire.
So his people wanted him to say something, and then the government wanted him to say the opposing thing.
And so what he says is, give to Caesar. Well, he says, give me this coin. And he shows that the coin has the face of Caesar on it. He says, give to Caesar what is Caesar's, and give to God what is God's. And the point was, actually, there's another layer here, which is that the coin, for the Jewish people to have the face of somebody, like make images like that, was idolatrous. And so the coin itself also it deified the emperor. And so the whole point is like, this coin is idolatrous. This coin itself is a representation of idolatry. And so give it back to the empire. And especially because the people asking the question, who were religious leaders, they themselves would have ascribed to the same, belief system that Jesus did, which was that this is idolatrous. So he said, just who cares about this coin? Like, give it back. There's a good book called What is Money? I think it's by Rothbard. I believe it was by Rothbard, which talks about the history of money.
Mm.
which he talks about that. He talks about the dilution of money and how it always serves empires. And it typically actually serves, in particular, the cause of war,
Yeah.
because war is extremely expensive. And so, in order to do it and in order to get your population to take the sacrifice, at some point, you need to borrow against what essentially is their future by diluting the money supply. But then, for the period between when you do that to the point where inflation catches up and people realize that this coin is not worth as much anymore, or this dollar is not worth as much anymore, you have more power and ability to spend. Um, so, but yeah,
Yeah.
so empires have always done this.
Yeah, and I often think too, I was thinking about this today, it's just like it makes sense to kind of keep people in ignorance to a degree because society depends. You can't have a bunch of if everybody's wealthy,
Yeah.
society is really not going to work. If everybody's financially well off and
Sure.
it doesn't need to show up for work, society really doesn't function. You need kind of people living paycheck to paycheck and
Mm.
working the
Well, it
job of
depends. I
building the
don't know.
roads and
So are you saying this in a cynical way, or you think this is the way it is? Because I would have an objection to the way, like, to that needing to be the way it is.
mm,
Um,
well, how else would let's say everybody was like financially well off, right?
sure.
Everybody's got $1 million in the bank and
Yeah,
they
yeah,
got a
yeah.
home and
Right.
who's showing up to
Not today. Yeah, you couldn't do it today. But I
mm,
guess what I would get at is that technology can drive and better the lives of people,
mm,
so much so that what we think of today as somebody being well off could be the basic standard of living for everybody,
yeah.
because the quality of goods is so cheap to make because technology is so advanced. I mean, that is the case
And
today.
we are here.
That
Yeah.
is
I
the
mean, we
case.
eat
Yeah.
like, uh, you know, uh, gluttons, it's like you used to have feast and then you'd have the peasants eating
Right.
like, having barely anything, but we can get a full meal just down the street. We can have it delivered right to our door.
Yeah.
The transportation, the cell phone. So it's like, yeah, we all kind of live like kings in a way
Oh yeah,
because of
compared to the
technology.
quality, yeah, absolutely. Compared, yeah,
Yeah.
technology. I mean, yeah, just the advances, and so I don't know. I wouldn't necessarily say it's because of capitalism per se, though. I think the capitalist system has very very clear advantages, and it works really really well
Right.
for the advance of technology,
Hmm.
and it's done amazing things. But I actually think a lot of those problems around inequity, inequality, poverty, it's a mix of mostly human error, human sinfulness, just our inability to structure ourselves and organize
Like
ourselves in a
discipline.
way that would lead to like flourishing. Or and
Mm.
also you have to also include people taking advantage of other people for sure. That's not a non-factor. You know what I mean?
Mm.
Um, I think well, it's part going back to the Hollywood strike. There was somebody I forget who it was. It was on a was given a short interview and was talking about the strike, and they were just talking about how some of the writers for some of these shows couldn't eat, or they were, basically working or living the life of a gig worker,
Hmm.
working for Uber or whatever it might be, but they're writing movies and these movies are making a lot of money. And the CEO of X, I forget what group it was making $250 million. And
Right.
so the argument was simply, hey, at some point you do have to just at least ask the question or acknowledge that the greed is a real thing. Like greed is not
Right.
it's not an imaginary concept just
Well,
because we're in
that
this.
that
Yeah.
exact thing, not the exact thing, but very similar in the city today where we got an Uber over to place that we're going. And he had mentioned, oh, I work for that company. And I have worked for that company for 20 years
Oh wow.
and very faithfully knew the CEO. And it kind of was like, all right, you've been working for this company for 20 years. Why are you driving Uber? Right?
Yeah.
He worked for this company in Boston and had been there
Hmm.
for 20 years, and they are very successful. Multiple locations. Um,
Yeah. And it's
yeah,
easy for me to say, right? I mean, and because if I had the opportunity to make a bill, like, am I going to just say no, give it back to my employees? I would hope so, actually. I would actually hope to say, I could do with 50 million less. Let's give everyone a pay raise for the next 2 years or something like
right,
that.
right, right, right,
And just make better movies. And it
right.
doesn't have to be a zero sum game, which is, I think, where I land about the entire question of human flourishing and standards of living and how our world can work best is just, I think actually that we have the creative capacity to do incredible things and lift everyone's standard of living, but we don't live in a perfect world and people are going to make decisions that are going to impact people harmfully, or incentives are wrong. And this actually reminds me of a story I want to share. Can I share this story?
Yeah, absolutely.
So it's not a personal story. It's actually something I heard on another podcast. There's a guy named Brett Kugelmass. He owns an energy company called Last Energy. They're trying to sell nuclear reactors. And he tells the story of how the nuclear industry, I guess in the 60s and 70s, after a couple of accidents, so there was 3 Mile Island, I guess is one of the large ones, Chernobyl in Russia, the industry itself stopped selling reactors and started to sell safety and went on this tremendous marketing and propaganda essentially campaign to make everyone afraid of what would happen if a nuclear reactor failed. And Brett's position is essentially that even since the 60s and 70s, the water-based reactors that we still use, the core technology of which has not been changed since then, is incredibly, incredibly safe. And even if it failed, no one would be hurt. So, which is shocking, the idea that we're all afraid of nuclear, right? When we think of nuclear bombs, and it is the same core technology. But the reason I thought about this in connecting it to this whole conversation of people flourishing and not everyone necessarily being wealthy because it would ruin the system, ruin incentives, is because with nuclear, if we actually had scaled out nuclear power the way that Nixon, JFK, presidents in that era were saying that they were going to do, we would have dirt cheap power. I mean, you wouldn't have a utility bill essentially, and then you just think about what that could do for just the
world. Yeah,
just so much less strain, right? Just the basic standard of living that could be provided at that point. Not because people necessarily are working for it, but it also gives everyone just a different starting place, so that those people who are going to excel anyways, excel all the more, and those who weren't, who are going to fall off, they're not necessarily on the street, right?
You know what I need to do? I do this questionnaire for anyone coming on the podcast, and it's usually like, how comfortable are you talking about business practices? How comfortable you're talking about like finances?
Yeah,
it really should be like, how comfortable are you talking about political correctness? How comfortable are you?
Sure.
Are you leaning left? Are you leaning right?
So you kind of know what you're.
Are you MAGA or are you?
Are you MAGA? Yeah, come with the trumpet.
Bernie Sanders.
Well, I love talking about that stuff. I think it's so interesting.
Me too.
Because it does impact, especially now. It doesn't necessarily impact your daily life. You can become obsessed with it. You can let it distract you. But I think it does impact your life today because all of our politics are national, and so much is determined like at the top now. Think about ERC. Even let's just say your business. This is like a federal program that was from the top that was instituted. So one of the things I thought, this is mostly a joke, but because I've been reading so many executive orders from the pandemic, so part of our work is we help companies qualify for this credit on the basis of how pandemic orders and restrictions, either on the state level or the federal level, impacted their operations. And you have to kind of make a case that they reduced your services by 10% or more, but you have to tie it to a government order or to many government orders during the time period that they qualify for. And so, I mean, I've read a lot of these, a lot, like hundreds of pages of government orders over the course of like 7 or 8 months. But so as I've read them, I just thought to myself, now clearly some of this stuff is copy and pasted, but from state to state, they are different. And I just thought, who had the time to write this?
Right.
I mean, I guess you could have 2 or 3 people in a room and they can get a lot done. But some of them are 30 pages. And then 2 days later, they were changed, or like a week later.
Right.
And it's another 30 pages. And Yeah, it is crazy.
Do people realize it? Like maybe people on the side where they advocated for the shutdowns, they advocated for the protocols, they advocated for the masks, they advocated um, for the vaccines. At least when as soon as Trump got out of office, and um, you know, do you think people sit back now and say, "Oh, I was wrong"?
I think people just want to move on. I don't think so. I mean, maybe some.
Hmm.
I think there was somebody in the Atlantic, I think, put out an article saying that we should have a pandemic. What was it? Amnesty, and the whole
Yeah,
thing was
yeah, I saw
just
that.
you saw that, yes. So I think people. So if you're in the position of someone who was perhaps very adamant about the restrictions
Mm.
and perhaps criticizing very loudly people who were less convinced that all these things were necessary, and you made some mistakes along the way,
You want that amnesty?
you want that amnesty in a certain sense, and you probably don't want anybody talking about it anymore, and you're probably asking, why are you even talking about this anymore? Just move on with your life.
Right,
But I think truth matters, so I think you do have to deal
right.
with the truth. So I think that's important for people to settle in their own minds, not necessarily the truth about every single detail of what happened, but just getting the contours right
I think
is
it,
pretty important.
I think a confession, because that was a very challenging time. I think it was more challenging for someone in my position, or if you owned a restaurant or something like that. And I'm sure there are
Mm,
people that had it, much worse too. Um, to kind of forgive and forget kind of thing, because it was so challenging. And I think someone who maybe just had a job, worked 9 to 5, or you worked at McDonald's, for you it was a snow day. You're a
sure,
kid and school is canceled.
sure.
There are a lot of benefits, and oh yeah, we're gonna pay you to stay home, all this stuff. You can collect unemployment and another
It's
400,
stressful
600
though.
bucks. Yeah, for sure. For me, it was like I was dealing with cancellations. There was
Yeah.
like over 100 cancellations, rebookings. My brother was in events, and my sister-in-law was in travel, so they both got laid off within
Oh,
like the first
yeah.
2 weeks, and they got two little kids, and so
Oof.
that was
Right.
that was challenging.
Yeah.
And so I was very, very vocal. I didn't think that we should have been shutting down, and but a lot of people were advocating for it. It's like, oh, you're kind of advocating for your own demise. And then like 6 months in, they kind of changed their tune a little bit, and they're like, um, then they had something to say. It was too late to say it,
Yeah, I
and
mean,
that was
that's
the
like the
problem.
mid fall or almost winter
You
at
had to
that
say
point.
it out of the gate. We need more people to say it out of the gate. And same thing with the forced vaccines. There were not enough. Too many people are willing to be complicit through just not having an opinion, or like not wanting to rock the boat,
Sure.
or not wanting to be hated, or not wanting to stick out their neck. And I feel like that's how we've gotten to the place we are as a society, because not enough people who feel a conviction say it. And we've
Hmm.
let a lot of things through, where it's like, I don't want to be the guy that everyone's pointing, or I don't want to be the person standing alone kind of taking the heat for
Sure.
this. And I don't,
Courage is not, yeah, courage can be
yeah, that's like
difficult.
is a great word for it. And it's like the ridicule. I was severely ridiculed online, kind of giving my opinions about certain things,
Mm,
and but I had to fight because I had something to fight for. And I think people have to realize that they do have something to fight for, and that, I mean, our country, we fought for it, but feel like, freedom, that kind of thing, we take that for granted.
sure.
Um, and we're always willing to educate like things to other people. Oh, so someone else will deal with it.
Someone else will deal with something. Yeah,
Yeah.
sure. It
Yeah.
was tough. It was a tough couple of years. To go back to the amnesty piece,
Mm,
I think, hey, a lot of forgiveness for everyone, for all of us to just, for when we're afraid. But I think it's important to acknowledge what happened. Like, and how were we? How did you act?
yeah.
And I'm not I'm no exception to that. But I just think because I happen to be much more on the side of we are overreacting.
Hmm.
And, I don't think I was, not, I don't think I know I wasn't as publicly engaged as you were, but I remember early on post some things online about lockdowns and why we shouldn't be doing that, et cetera. Um, and because I'm on that side of things, maybe it's easier for me to say that because I don't have as much remorse about making people do stuff. I was generally trying to like lessen that burden as much as possible. I was also a pastor during those 2 years.
Mm, that
So I
must
was
have
like
been tough.
leading people. And serving people in a context where
Well, you don't want to give faulty advice too, and have someone,
you're very trusted, even
yeah,
if you're not an expert in this situation.
right, where you have to side on the, side and caution and that kind of thing.
Yeah, often. Yeah, right. Exactly. So emotions got pretty hot though, I think sometimes around what you should and shouldn't do.
Yeah, and you can't please everybody. And I'm
No,
sure
no
it was,
way.
divided to some degree. Yeah, being a pastor is a tough job, I think.
Oh, it is. Okay, yeah.
Yeah,
I wrote a lot of joy, but I think like anything that if you love to do it and if it's your calling, it's what you want to do,
right.
then you just know that that's part of what comes with the territory. So it's not that I don't think anybody who's in ministry is surprised by the things that are well, maybe you can be surprised, but if you just remember that you're still serving people and you're dealing with people and people are people, whether you're in photography or you're in consulting or you're in ministry, then you're not going to be surprised when people act like people,
Right.
and do things that you're like, wow, that
Yeah.
wasn't the greatest thing to do. But
So you're with Hundredfold Consulting, and
Yeah.
you're really helping small businesses like myself kind of get their stuff together to get this ERC program, which is a huge. Is it a tax credit?
it's a refundable tax credit. Yeah.
Yeah, which we got a sizable amount.
Right.
I don't know if I should share the amount, but
I think it's up to you, Sean.
it was a sizable amount. And, if you're a small business that is kind of going through or had gone through the pandemic and you experience losses, you might be entitled to this ERC. And with Hundredfold Consulting, it was an expedited process.
It was fast,
I didn't go through my accountant almost so fast. I was like, is this legit? And the only
Sure.
reason that I actually went through this because I really trusted you, had a relationship with you.
Yeah.
We've known each other for a while. So I don't know if I would have, because I was getting other calls about the ERC program,
it's a little
and
bit
it
of a
seemed
gold
very
rush.
spammy,
Yeah.
But yeah, it is a gold rush because people are getting through. The government's giving out money or giving back money.
Yeah.
Yeah, so it can feel a little bit of that, but I got paid within 3 months, and it was
Yeah.
a good sizable amount.
Yeah, you were paid quickly, and I think the reason that I like doing it is while you have to remember the difficult parts of the pandemic, you remember them, and then it becomes sort of turned for a purpose at least, and you get reimbursed for your trouble.
Yeah.
I think people have a hard time if your business didn't decline, its revenue didn't decline though.
Mhm.
Sometimes people have trouble justifying whether they are entitled to it. And I often am, well, the reality is that the reason this particular credit was made was to incentivize jobs, incentivize job creation, and incentivize people keeping employees on. And so if you survived, not everyone survived the pandemic, first of all. So if you can create a couple extra jobs with it, or if you're an owner, if you're a small business owner, you only have a handful of employees and you pocket some of that money, I mean, eventually that money is going to find its way into the economy. So that's good too. That's not a bad thing necessarily. And I think people also, if you have a philosophical objection to government funds or stimulus,
Mhm.
you might have trouble also accepting it. But there as well, I think this money's already been earmarked. And so the reality is like someone else is going to get that money. We're going to run it out for
Right.
sure. There's a lot of people going after it.
And
So
I feel like the money supply is all cyclical because it's like,
you can tighten it. They can tighten.
yeah.
Yeah.
But so I'll do work, right? I'll take money from a customer, right, in exchange for services. So I have that money, but then when I get that money, the government does a 7% tax on that.
Yeah. They're always taking some of your money.
They're taking the 7%, then they're taking 40 of that amount,
Mm.
and the amount that the customer had given me, they had earned, and the government took 40% of that,
Right.
and then I'm gonna go pay my employees, and to pay my employees, the government's gonna take
That's a good point.
12%.
Yeah.
So it's like really all the amount that's actually for every time the dollar changes hand, the government's probably seeing about 80% of that dollar,
I see what you mean.
and it's all just kind of going back up to the government.
I see what you mean. Yeah. So for ERC, it's going back to the people's hands. We're getting
That's
some of
why
that.
they did this.
We're getting some money back into the people's hands. And it's been really fun. The one piece that we do also that has been fun for me is working with churches and nonprofits. Because so the owner of the company, Andrew King, comes from like the ministry, has a ministry background, nonprofit work background. So he has some trusted relationships. I come from that background. I was in ministry as a pastor. And so being able to just talk to other people and other pastors who or ministry leaders who typically they're just not going to have the resources to do this
Right.
themselves or don't know if they really qualify or just wouldn't be able to have a trusted conversation with someone who can tell them why they are entitled to it because it's not as simple as did my giving decline, or did my revenue suffer. As you know, don't go through the process, it's more complicated than that, and
Right.
we do a lot of that work for them, which is also different because I've worked for clients, payroll companies, uh, and other even accounting firms who are helping clients try to do this, and not everyone is doing the kind of due diligence that we do. So I would say that I would stack up our work against a law firm, even really the level of due diligence that we do and thoughtfulness and just
Yeah.
how well we situate a client to use those funds and say we think when you get these funds you don't have to worry about it. um, it's like really really excellent work. So
Yeah, working with you guys was definitely, it felt very thorough. You guys wanted to make sure you were dotting your I's and crossing your T's and really making sure that things are done right.
yeah, with hundredfold, so that I'm working with them, and then actually also so with modal my
Oh, right,
llc,
right,
so
right.
this is much more exploratory, but the
Yeah.
reality is just in terms of what I see my own work life looking like over the coming years is some church
What
planting.
does modal mean?
So modal, it has to do with like modalities. So meaning like in different ways is probably the most simple way to put it. With different ways of doing something, like analog versus digital. Like these are different modes of doing something, right?
Yeah.
So, um, does that make more sense? Actually,
Yeah,
that's
yeah,
probably
yeah.
the best.
And what do you guys do?
So it's brand new business. So my hope would be at least with this is what I've done in terms of my professional secular work experience outside of a ministry context, which is really like my heart and my passion, what I find deepest purpose in. My whole life really infuses everything. But on the business side, when I was working with Serve, working with now with Hundredfold, some of my graduate, even some of the work that I did during graduate school, um, I just enjoy seeing things grow. Yeah, so the idea behind Modal is going to be more helping companies grow, helping organizations grow. Whether it's, I mean, I've met some people recently, more than like probably 3 or 4 people who are small business owners, and
Mm,
they're just getting started.
mm,
And there's not, um, so this is not necessarily a scalable business idea, so to speak. But they have needs, and it's going to take them a long time
yeah.
to figure it out unless they just have a conversation with somebody who knows already what to
Right.
do, right?
Right.
So some guys who I know who like own a cleaning company, they're wicked young. Um, and I think one of them's 21, and just didn't know he should set this up as an S corp. Right now, I'm just gonna tell him that that's fine. But there's so many other things that came up in that one conversation with him.
Yeah.
Where I said, "Hey, man, I'd love to help you, do this, even sales, for example." So that's another side of things that I think we're going to lean into with
So
modal
it's almost
is
a consultancy.
so it would be similar to a consultancy, but I think kind of focused in on growth and sales. So it's the same thing with hundredfold. Is what I've enjoyed the most is really stretching us into either new industries or a client base that we haven't necessarily dealt with before,
Yeah.
whether in size or in industry. So that's kind of been what I've done is we've done a lot of work with nonprofits, and now and kind of all along we're doing some for-profit work, but stretching to let's go work with a mid-sized company with close to 500 employees that's doing millions of dollars in revenue. Can we help them with the ERC? Who do they have? And talking more to like C-suite
Right.
people and helping them grow. So I think, but I just naturally am going to do that. I'm like naturally going to go see if I can get that client. I'm going to go see if I can get, can we get anybody in the Fortune, maybe not Fortune 500, but how big can we get? Right. And so the systems for that
Now,
are,
would your commission structure stay the same if, or does it scale down as the growth of the company or the refund or ERC credit is gonna scale up?
so hundredfold, it varies. So at a certain number, we are willing to have conversations, but we typically We deliberately undercut.
But your commission stays the same, right?
Oh, right, correct.
Okay.
Yes. Yep. No, at least to date.
Yeah.
So, and also I was
So
part of
if you went after a Fortune 500 company, actually, got a whale, then you'd take home a sizable commission. Yeah.
for sure. But there would probably be negotiations around it and like what's justified for the amount of work that we're doing. Now, of course, I'm of the opinion that if you're going, unlike a product, I would say even every service has some sort of tangible value, right?
Mhm.
Our service is literally going to result in dollars. So I can tell you exactly how much
Right.
what we're doing for you is worth to you. And so the
Yeah.
commission size is almost always justified in my mind. But I think the dollar numbers get high for people and they ask some questions. But
now these bigger companies, though, I imagine they have full service
accounting firms,
Yeah.
CFOs, but those people aren't doing ERC all day. So, I've worked with CFO who was told they don't qualify. I worked with another CFO who was told that they had already done it, and they did, but they didn't do it for 2021.
Both years,
and they were eligible for 2021, and the money was like 4x what they had gotten in 2020. So I think going back to some of our earlier conversations, even around medicine, et cetera, like you can fall prey to just like a fallacy of professionalization, like the idea that just because somebody's a professional in a certain industry that nobody from outside that industry could possibly know more than them, or you should discount the outside voice. So I'm not an accountant per se, but I can say a lot in our firm, especially like as a collective.
Yeah.
We have as much knowledge as any accounting firm about ERC. So we can speak to it more intelligibly sometimes than, again, a very large, successful company than their accounting firm can. So now there are, again, accounting firms in the country that are doing ERC work. So it's not like we're that special. I'm just saying that it is the case.
Like, what has been like your highest commission check?
Me personally? Yeah, I don't know.
This is why we need that form.
This is why we need a form, you said?
Yeah, the form where it's just like how comfortable you're talking about finances.
Oh, sure.
Yeah.
I just don't know. I could say, well, let me speak to deal size, I guess.
Yeah.
For the company. So we've done deals where we're getting organizations like 2 mil, you know. So that's like to your pocket. So if you think about your revenue for a year, like what else could you ask for in terms of the amount of work that you're doing?
How long is the 100-fold? Is this business kind of built around this ERC, and without the ERC, it's no longer a business? And how long do you foresee this kind of going?
Yeah, you might have to have Andrew King on here to talk about 100-fold more so. But I think that there will be other services. There will be other services rolled out of it. Just because we have a good relationship now with clients and they trust us. And so.
But was it birthed out of the ERC?
It was birthed out of ERC work though, yeah. If you haven't done ERC, it's worth the phone call. And if you've been told you don't qualify, it's worth the phone call. And if you have already done it, but you didn't do it for 2021, worth looking into, because often enough we do help people get extra funds. And given how tough the pandemic was, as we've talked about, it's worth the time. It's like the biggest ROI on time I've ever seen.
Oh yeah. 100%.
So, you agree with that? Yeah.
Yeah.
Good.
Yeah, 100%. I mean, I took a phone call. I was out in California, or maybe 2 phone calls with you. Pretty quick. And yeah,
there was a lot of work that went along the way, but yeah.
Maybe for you.
Was it? Yeah, maybe for me. Yeah, I like that. I appreciate that.
Yeah.
I'm glad to take the work off your plate.
I think I had to send over some forms and do a little bit of digging with some stuff. But let's talk about modal. With that, I've thought about the consulting space. What I find about the challenging part about the consulting space is not a lot of people find a lot of value in consulting.
Yeah.
Everybody wants advice, free advice, and there's plenty of free advice on the internet.
Oh yeah.
There's no shortage of it, and everybody's willing to give their opinion. And everybody who, has some type of experience but hasn't walked in your shoes will give their opinion, on what you should do. but it's a little bit different like as a business owner while you're in it. And
Yeah.
I find with consulting, if I were to consult a business, I've done some, just free stuff,
Yeah.
helping out here and there, and
Yeah.
even kind of implemented some systems for some other companies. And I like doing that just because I like, just doing it.
Right.
And I just feel like you say, all right, I'm going to charge you $300 an hour, $250 an
Sure.
hour, right?
Yeah.
Well, it's like, I'm like,
Got to get the value.
Yeah. But really, if you say, well, this $250 is going to make you $1,000,
Mm-hmm.
if you implement this, then it makes a lot of sense.
Mm-hmm.
But I feel like business owners are always very frugal,
Yeah.
and unwilling
Absolutely.
to spend. And I thought about doing things for me. If I were to do it, I would kind of come into it from a point of, hey, I'll help you grow your revenue. If you're at this, we'll 2x your revenue or 5x your revenue.
Yeah.
But in exchange, if we hit those goals, then I get an equity.
Mm-hmm.
So
Mm-hmm.
I'd always try to play it up for like an equity
Yeah.
play, because that matches my long-term goals a little bit
Right.
more.
Right.
And I feel like if I'm going to be helping grow a company, I want to be like invested into it and
That's
kind of
fair.
have some reward.
Yeah. Yeah. That's not a bad idea. I mean, I think, it does have to do with your goals ultimately, right? Like what's the scale of the company? And
I wanted to ask you, like, what is your kind of play there with consulting?
yeah, well, I actually have thought about so I think our approach is going to be much more boots on the ground. So I think, and even just in terms of team and people who I'm talking to and looking to bring in, is going to be much more, results oriented and not just necessarily information. Because I think, we're in the age of AI. I mean, go use ChatGPT.
Right.
Like that's what's gonna, unless it's in the past 2 years, and then you just pay for premium, get your plugins, and you can go do nearly anything. Now, maybe training people in how to use that is going to be a valuable, piece of information and technical. But that's an example of boots on the ground work. That's actual clicking, typing, that's doing something tangible for the owner. So I would see us much more in the space of like, we're going to do this. It's going to be time stamped, right? We're going to get you from A to B. Here's what you need to do. Like to get, if you're at the very, very beginning, you're just starting your business. I mean, you can just read up on stuff and learn it yourself, or you could work with us, and let's do that in like a week. Instead of taking like 3 months for you to figure this out. Let's do that right now.
There's a lot of things as a business owner, especially if you're a creative.
Yeah.
Hey, I like to take photos or edit photos, and then all of a sudden you're like, I got to formulate an LLC.
Yeah.
I think it could be really challenging.
Yeah. No, simple stuff for sure.
And I think you can start wrong.
Oh,
where
yeah.
It's like you implement some wrong systems and you're 3 years down the road, and you got to rework everything, whether it be your CRM or your accounting software or something like that. There's a lot of things that we started wrong, just because we didn't know what we were doing.
Yeah. I think avoiding pitfalls is also for sure something valuable in having even just like advisors and trusted people. But with modal, the reason I call it modal is because I would like to do multi-modal kind of consulting, so to speak, or multimodal services, so that we're not just, for example, just in sales, and we're just helping people grow their revenue, or we're not just in recruiting, or we're not just, so multimodal is like different modes of how we will help your business. But all of them really rooted in growing it. So I'm not necessarily going to be helpful in HR piece. I'm not trying to be your coach, your business coach, right? So it's kind of really specific, because that's the piece where I've seen success. So you want to
focus on growth.
Yeah, so that's the piece where I've seen success, and I think, but granted, the reality is in my own life and my own experience has been very boots on the ground. So that's where I've seen success. And so that's where I'm going to continue to do that and figure out how to and also just find like-minded people, because I've met people as well who, oh, you're really good at that, you can do that, right? So it might not, it's not as simple as just growth in the sense of you're good at making a sale, but you're also good at relationships, and you're good at, all right, how do you translate those sales into like further referrals or partnerships, or Yeah. And do you know how to like replicate that even beyond just yourself? So
There's just a lot of small details I think that go into growing a business, and even down like you got to. I think consulting is usually high level,
yeah, it is.
especially when it comes to growth. But then there's a lot of things that you get more granular, as you scale that you have to really have an eye on.
One thing that I do think also is that you can't short circuit that stuff. So when I said, yeah, let's take you from A to B
Mm-hmm.
instead of let's take in that 6 months, let's do that in like you can do this in the next 4 days. You
Mm-hmm.
just work with us, work for a week. We'll help you get this stuff set up that you really should do right now. So the thing to be aware of there would be if there's any downside to that, it would be your own learning in that process. But I think that would be something that we would, need to make sure we
Right.
also provide is the know-how so that you don't now you're given this thing or you've been kind of helped, but you don't know how you got there. You know what I mean?
Right.
Um,
And I think also to start though, you need proof of concept.
yeah, right.
Yeah. I feel like that's what I find too. You need a business, right? That you can, what, are you going to say something?
No, yeah, continue.
Yeah. You need a business that you can point to and say, I worked with this business.
Right.
I took it
Okay,
from,
yeah,
they were
yeah.
doing 100K in sales and now they're
Yeah.
doing 2 million in sales,
Right.
So that proof of concept, I feel like you need that real selling point.
Yeah, I think our first, right now, really obviously I'm working with 100-fold.
Mhm.
So that's like probably going to be our launching pad is just here's what our team did, etc.
Yeah.
Got a couple people working with me now. So, and it's been really fun. Now that's a unique opportunity, but every business is niche. Every business is
Right.
going to have that aspect. So it's really what's translatable.
And how do you
from
take
that.
that on from a pricing standpoint? Do you do like a consulting monthly kind of fee?
Yeah, I guess it would depend on the mood of service, right? Like if
Mm.
if it's consulting based, then that would be probably like just an hourly fee. But I would actually prefer to work on results, like again, commission oriented,
Right.
probably focused in on sales first for the first
Okay. It's like
next
training sales
year,
teams and
and even just like inserting people outside sales.
oh, okay. Yeah, you had mentioned that.
I think that's really going to be our focus, at least at the very beginning, because it's what to say proof of concept is what I could say. Here's what I did, here's how we helped. And that's very raw. That's all modal is like just my ideation at this point. Right.
Right.
But it's really going off of what I've enjoyed doing to date, like outside of ministry. So I'm excited about the work that we're doing with Hundredfold. I'm excited about modal, excited about the church plant piece. But, in the end, it kind of ultimately it's about like what lasts forever, so to speak. And what I believe at least, is that these relationships, anything that I put into people is what
Mhm.
really is going to last. And so I can say though, I think in our work, this is probably the case for you too. I mean, making memories for people in the wedding industry, that's kind of what feels like most meaningful about the work.
Yeah, I think doing good work or to the best of your ability is really important. And then, like you said, leaving an impact on people, making sure that like you're training up like the next generation or just making some kind of investment into other people. Um, to me, that's important. All right, should we do it?
Yeah.
Any kind of last thoughts that you wanted to
Um,
have people
Original design.
original?
Just
design?
don't overcomplicate things. Just remember the nuclear industry. Remember nuclear power plants. All the power we could want in the original design. It worked well. So don't add like a lot of layers of complexity to these things.
Mm.
Whether it's in business life, I think in my own faith, even it's very much like get back to what is the original design there and what works. So
Keep it simple. And then if they do want to find you, whether it be for the ERC or
yeah,
consulting,
sure. You can find me on Twitter.
Twitter.
Cumplido Manny.
That's an interesting.
Oh wow, is that my handle? I should double check that. Can we like add a tag to the right what the right handle is? I forget what my handle
Yeah,
is.
we usually send over like a review link for you
Yeah.
to watch the episode.
Yeah.
Which is just kind of a long episode. I think we've been going like 3 hours.
There's no way this is gonna all make it. That's okay though. But we'll get my Twitter handle right. That would actually be the best way I think to contact me because otherwise it's my email or something. I don't have like a website. I don't want people emailing me right now. Just tweet at me. I got to grow my Twitter fan base.
So thanks for tuning in to Moving the Mountain, a creative leadership podcast. Special thanks to our guest, Manny Cumplido of 100-Fold Consulting and Modal. So check those out. And thanks for tuning in.